All right, welcome to the Clay News and Views podcast. My name is Josh Allen, and today I have the pleasure of having with me Jason Bellamy-Fults. Mr. Fults is running for Jennifer Bradley's seat in the Florida legislature. Now, I always forget which which House district is it? What seat does she have? I'm drawing a blank here. I had
Senate
what's it?
District 6.
Senate District 6, part of which is Clay County, encompasses a whole lot of other places. So, Mr. Bellamy-Fults, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you, and why are you running for the Florida legislature?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me too. I appreciate getting the opportunity to talk with you. So I'm a generation Floridian. I grew up down in the I-4 corridor and relocated to after college and living abroad for a while and so on and so forth. Relocated to Gainesville, Florida in '08. So I've been in Gainesville since '08. I've been really active in my community. I do a lot of work with a local nonprofit called the Community Weatherization Coalition. And we help people who are struggling with their utility bills, find ways to lower their bills and access like critical home repair. That's been a big part of my life in Alachua County. I'm also really active in labor and a labor movement. I'm a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and I am active in my Central Labor Council and have been active in a lot of just, you know, bread and butter, like working class issues in my community, like stopping wage theft and helping people get a living wage, helping people who are trying to get a union, so on and so forth. So I've, like I said, been very active in my community for a long time. I've had people that have approached me over the years, that have said, hey, do you have any interest in running for maybe city commission or, something like that? And it's just not really honestly ever been something that was on my bingo card. I like the work that I do. And but what has become really apparent to me, particularly in the last several years, is that, we have folks in Tallahassee right now that I grew up with the understanding that Republicans were small government, basically, were advocates of small government. And I think that, that seemed to be the case until they had control of government. And then now what we're seeing more and more is this, you know, really intense top-down decision making, a lot of preemption going on, a lot of particularly what I'm concerned about is union busting going on. And so I started, because I'm involved in the labor movement, I started going up to Tallahassee during what we call Working Family Lobby Corps. And that's a project of the AFL-CIO where they take just, rank and file working people from their communities and they bring us up to Tallahassee, have us talk with legislators about our issues and how the things that they're voting on affect us. So I've gone and done that a few times. And this year I was in Tallahassee for a particular hearing, Senate Bill 1296, which is seeking to essentially erase, any kind of public sector unions in the state. Very aggressive anti-union bill. And I'm sitting there in the audience with literally like a few hundred people from around the state. And I'm sitting there with my wife, who's a school teacher, and we look up on the committee, and I said, "Hey, hon, that's our senator right there. That's Jennifer Bradley." And so, maybe we'll be able to sway her. So dozens and dozens of people. We sat there for hours, and everybody from healthcare workers, sanitation workers, teachers, Republicans, Democrats, all kinds of people got up one after another and said, hey, this is going to hurt my family. This is going to hurt my ability to make a living wage and take care of my family. And I really wish that you wouldn't do this. And I could literally count on one hand the number of people that got up and spoke in favor of it. And then at the very end, near the very end, this fella, he's a professional lobbyist for the Freedom Foundation. He's a professional union buster, and he's the guy that allegedly wrote the legislation. He gets up there, he says a few words, and they voted it out of committee. And unfortunately, our senator, Jennifer Bradley, who has been, cashing checks from the Florida Education Association, for instance, for years, stabbed us in the back. And so we had a little, powwow in the parking lot after that hearing. And I just said, look, like, it's not okay that we have members of our legislative delegation that, stab us in the back like that. And it's especially not okay that people like that run for office unopposed like she did 4 years ago. And so I came back to my community with kind of a mission that, like, we need to run somebody against her this time. And I spent about a solid month calling everybody, every elected official I could think of, anybody that I thought might be interested in doing that. And the answer I kept hearing over and over again was just, well, it's too conservative of a district. A Democrat doesn't have any chance of winning that race. We're not going to invest resources in it, so on and so forth. And so after about a month or so of making all these calls, people either kind of stopped taking my calls or they said, hey, well, you're the one with the big mouth here. Why don't you go ahead and do it? And so, you can imagine that's a pretty big leap for somebody that has never run for office before, that's never held public office, all of a sudden trying to run for state senate. But I just honestly, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to live with myself and I wasn't going to be able to sleep between now and November if we let her run unopposed again. And so I figure, well, all right, worst thing I can do is put my name out there and get out and talk to people and give people an actual choice this November, like they didn't have 4 years ago. So that's, a little bit about me and kind of what brought me to this journey and brought me to talking to you today.
So that is interesting because Clay County is, you know, for all intents and purposes, a very deep red county. And the Republican playbook here in Clay County and I think abroad in Florida is a twofold. It's a twofold tactic. First, they ignore you, and then if you gain enough steam, they start to smear you, and then they start to try to cheat to change the rules. I don't know if you followed Matt the Welder at all, who's running against Wilt Simpson for agriculture commissioner. And I'm not endorsing any particular candidate or whatever in that race, and nobody cares if I did anyway. But my point by bringing him up is he started to gain traction. So first they ignored him, and they basically gave orders to all of the local counties and Republican Party officials and people to not just basically don't deal with him. Then they couldn't ignore him anymore. So Wilton Simpson went to his friends in the legislature and they passed a bill saying that if you had changed your name within the last X amount of days, you couldn't be on the ballot, specifically targeting him because he was the only person in the entire state running that had changed their name. And it hadn't been for a divorce or a marriage or the little caveats they put in there. So you say the worst thing you can happen is have some conversations. I don't know. I hope that I hope they just stick with ignoring you and not doing worse things to you. But what's your sales pitch to somebody in Clay County, in a deep red county that has never heard of you and is probably already seeing what they think are red flags when you talk about labor unions and some of the things that you said? What's your pitch to the people of Clay County about why you'd be a better alternative for them than the Bradley family?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, folks have to kind of look around them and they have to see the situation that our state is in and our country is in and that their pocketbooks are in, and they have to decide for themselves if they're happy, with the direction that things are going in. My thing is that, we basically had one group of people that have been in charge of our state for a generation now. And when I say one group of people, I don't even mean Republicans. I mean oligarchs. I think that the wealthy have complete capture of our legislature at this point. And I'm not, to be completely honest, I'm not a deeply partisan person. If I could have run this as an MPA, I would have. I just want people to have an option. And what I can promise to people is that I will be accountable and I will be transparent and I will have integrity. That's really the most I can, promise people. We're not going to agree on everything. That's fine. But unlike my opponent, you can't just buy me by writing me a big enough check. I'm not taking any PAC money, any big corporate donations or anything for my campaign, and I have no intention ever to do so. So what I would just ask of people in this community is just to give me a chance and get to know me. I'm pretty much going to be spending all my weekends between now and November up here in Clay County. I'm going to be knocking on an awful lot of doors and talking to a lot of people. And so if you're curious and you just want to get to know who I am, take a look at my website, give me a call, shoot me an email. I'm just here to talk to people. So
What is your website? What's your
yeah,
URL, your
it's
domain name?
takingbackflorida.org.
.org. Got it. Yeah. So you're an electrical engineer by trade, right? Am I
Well,
did I read that correctly when I was looking you up, or you're
I'm an electrical worker. I've been an electrical worker.
electrical worker?
Right, right.
That's
So,
that's what it
so
is.
I went through the IBW 1205 apprenticeship, and I've worked in everywhere you can imagine, from paper mills to gas transmission plants to hospitals, prisons. All of 1205 is a very big jurisdiction. And at some point, they asked me to start teaching at our apprenticeship school, and so I became an instructor. And I just really got the education bug, and I love teaching. And so at the same time I was teaching there, I started teaching at our local community college, Santa Fe. I was teaching adult ed over there. And while I was at Santa Fe, I had the opportunity to go to UF. And so I started pursuing a master's degree in education because I didn't have any formal background in education, but I really liked it. I liked being in the classroom. And then as things happened, while I was at UF pursuing my master's degree, there was an opening in the academic technologies department. And so they hired me out of my master's program, and I've been at UF for about 4 years now. So I'm not currently doing electrical work. I'm currently just, helping people with academic technology issues. But that's been a lot of my background over the past many years that I've lived in this area is doing electrical work.
Okay. Okay. So you're knowledgeable about solar power and just it seems like the power grid in general, you have some level of knowledge and expertise on that. A big hot button issue here recently in Clay County has been data centers. The county commissioners just recently enacted a 12-month moratorium because they realized that we don't have any the code, the ordinances and code here in Clay County are not sufficient to manage and regulate data centers in the way that they feel they ought to be. What's your stance on data centers? Some people want an outright ban. Other people think that they're, what, as one of our county commissioners said, quote unquote, good partners. Where do you stand on data centers?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm definitely, kind of learning about this issue as I go. And I'll give you a couple examples. I definitely know plenty of people that are just, as you said, just outright anti data centers. They don't want them anywhere around. But I'm also an IBEW member. And when these things get built, it tends to be our guys that are out building. And so even within my union, there are a lot of fellas that are hurting right now financially that would be like to be out building these things. At the same time, a lot of the fellas in my union and women in my union, they enjoy the outdoors. They enjoy their rural lands. They enjoy having clean water, and I don't think they're willing to sacrifice that for a short-term job. And so, to be completely honest, where I'm at on this issue is just that I think that it should be a community decision. I think that just like happened here in Clay County, people should get together. They should talk about the pros and cons. They should have good informed conversation, and they should decide for themselves whether they want them or not. What I am afraid of, because of the pattern that I've seen in Tallahassee, is that the big companies are going to start writing big checks to the folks up there, or they already are. And what we are going to see is the kind of preemption legislation up there in the coming years that we have seen around so many other issues in the state. And so it's no longer going to be a choice that's left up to communities. And we're going to see what the state will do is that they'll set maybe a very minimum floor, for what these things are allowed to do, and then they'll say, and that's it. That's it. The communities have no other ability to decide. So that's kind of where I'm at, and that's a big theme with my campaign is pushing back against the preemptions in Tallahassee. I think that's gotten really out of control, and I think that people that are going to be on the front lines of the repercussions of these kind of decisions deserve the say in how it goes.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like the legislature wants to turn the entire state into just an endless sea of subdivisions and storage units and car washes and data centers, right? And it's probably obviously, not entirely true, but that's definitely you definitely get the feeling that all the development and all the things that happen are really pushed by who's donating to the Republican Party. And it's good to hear you say that home rule is important because that's exactly the same thing that I don't want. My big qualm with some of the data center things that have been enacted across the country is that they were done via NDAs, and the community didn't get to see the details of the project. It was just presented to them after it was already voted in and approved, and that's one of the things I would like to make sure that we don't have. So another big thing is solar power, right? You see it popping up all over everybody's houses. You had mentioned somewhere I read, either on your website or in one of the interviews that you've done, you had mentioned something about solar metering, and it looks like you said Senator Bradley killed solar net metering via a Senate bill and House bill. What can you walk us through in a nutshell? What is that? What is solar net metering? Why is it important? And what would you have done differently?
Sure. So I used to be a solar installer. That was one of the things that I did when I was an electrical worker, and I've spent a lot of my time on rooftops and in attics installing solar. And one of my favorite parts of every job, when we would finish, we were completely done, and that system was ready to turn on, and we could flip the switch. We'd bring the homeowner out to their meter, and we'd stand in front of the meter. We'd flip the switch, and then your meter is kind of spinning when you're consuming electricity, and then it would slow down, it would stop, and then it would actually start spinning backwards. And that was the part where you would see a homeowner just get like ecstatic, because that means that you're producing more electricity than you're actually consuming. You're sending that electricity back into the grid, and your meter is registering how much you're sending back into the grid. And so net metering basically just says, the the utility provider has to pay you, you know, back for the electricity that you're putting back into the grid. And they have to pay you at the same rate that they're selling it to you for. And that's one of the things that makes
Okay,
solar,
I like that.
yeah, that's one of the things that makes solar a good investment for people, because what happens is, during some parts of the year, you're generating more than you're using. So you're selling that back to the utility. You're getting a credit. And then during the times of the year where you're using more, that you can work down that credit basically. But it's also one of the things that the big utility companies hate. They hate that. And so what happened is, and this is one of the most blatant examples of just corruption that I've seen. FP&L, which has way too much power in our state politics, in my opinion, came to Senator Bradley. In one hand, here's a check for $10,000. In another hand, here's this bill that we wrote that's going to kill net metering. And basically, what that would mean is that the utilities get to decide how much they're going to pay you for that solar, instead of paying you at the same rate that you're buying electricity from for them. And so it makes it a much worse investment for people that are trying to put solar into their home. And keep in mind now, people that are putting solar on their home, they're making an investment in the grid, right? I mean, like because those electrons they're generating, they're flowing into the grid, they're going to their neighbors' homes, and they're financing that a lot of times.
Mhm.
So it's already the reason more people don't have solar is because you have to finance it, and it takes several years to pay for itself, and so on and so forth. And so what that legislation would have done is it would have made it even worse proposition for people, because what the utilities do not want is you putting solar on your home. They're fine with going out and making a big solar farm that they own, and then they get to sell you that electricity. But what they don't want is you putting it up on your house, and then they have to write you a check. So anyway, all that to say, they wrote this legislation. They wrote Jennifer Bradley a nice check. She shepherded that bill all the way through the legislature. It got passed. And then the only reason it got stopped was because Ron DeSantis, of all people, looked at that and said, this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt consumers in this state. And and it was very unpopular. And so he vetoed it. So Ron saved us on that particular bill. And I will tell you, as
Right.
somebody that was a solar installer for many years, it is a very nonpartisan issue. I installed solar on everything from the most liberal, you know, hybrid car driving person you've met to like people that were literal preppers, like that they had like, their
Yep.
gun stockpile over here. And so when you start going after solar, for people, you're really waking the dragon, as they say. And so fortunately we were able to beat that bill thanks to Ron DeSantis. But it's just one more example, I think, of many of, like I said, our utilities having way too much control over what happens in Tallahassee. And it's a big part of the reason that people's bills are as high as they are in the state for utilities, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, we're pretty fortunate. Most of Clay County, our power comes from Clay Electric, which is a co-op. So it's the way I describe it to people is it's more like a credit union than a bank,
Oh,
where they're incentivized as each member is technically an owner, and we vote on the board of directors or whatever. They're a little more likely to be frugal than some of these giant corporations that are selling power. Am I remembering wrong? But I feel like I remember as part of that conversation with net metering was the fact that in the state of Florida, if I make my home completely energy self-sufficient, I am not allowed to disconnect from the energy grid. I have to stay connected. It's illegal for me to disconnect. Am I right on that, or am I remembering it incorrectly?
it's a good question. I never encountered anybody that was trying to disconnect from the grid. When I did solar, I definitely did some homes that were completely off grid. So they had just never been connected to the grid. And we did battery backup systems for them. And they were very happy not to have to pay to bring the grid to where they were living because they were, kind of far off the beaten path. But that's a good question. That's one
Right.
that I'm not super sure about what the current law is. I'm gonna be honest. But I will say this.
Got it.
I will
Yeah,
say,
it may have been part of what the yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
well, no,
No worries.
the thing to me with all these kind of decisions is that they should be made in direct consultation with the stakeholders, like the people that are paying the bills at the ground level, and that these big money, FP&L putting the thumb on the scale decisions like this is just not okay, and it's one of the things that needs to end. And even to come back to the data center question that you were talking about a little bit ago, there were two different versions of the data center bill that came before the legislature this year. There was a Senate version and the House version, and from what I understand, the Senate version was significantly better in terms of community benefit and what it would have done. But again, FP&L put their thumb on the scale, and they decided which version of that bill was going to get passed, and it was not the one that was going to be better for the consumers. So we have to stop that. And I'll just say, like, one of the first things that I would try and do if I get elected and we have the kind of change up there that I hope we'll have is to say, look, if you're a PSC regulated monopoly utility, you are no longer allowed to put money into our political system. It's not okay for you to be a monopoly, to have a guaranteed profit margin, and then to be taking that profit and pumping it into corrupting our political system. Like, that's not okay. And those folks, FP&L, Duke, they have not Tico, they have not been good actors in our system. And they've donated, over, last I counted, over $120,000 to my opponent. So that to me tells me,
Yeah.
everything you
Yep.
need to know.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, we're very fortunate in Clay County. Most of us, there's small subsets of the county. Green Coast Springs has its own electric company. Parts of Orange Park have what's the one in Jacksonville? I'm drawing a blank here, but anyway,
Oh, JEA.
so we're most of us are JEA. I don't know why. That's my initials, Joshua Aaron Allen. I don't know why I forgot it. JEA. But yeah, we're pretty fortunate here. So let's change gears a little bit because I think you and I are probably more interested in power and electricity than most folks that might be listening to this. So you have on your website, you talk about unaffordable housing and you say that's a problem. And I agree. I think housing prices are too high. I think there's a lot of factors going into that. Uh, what do you see as a solution to houses being unaffordable for the average family slash consumer in Florida?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one is definitely going to be homeowners insurance. I think that, I've personally seen that have a big impact. And one of the things I like to talk about with housing too, of course, is like your total housing cost. So obviously, like, housing prices are an important piece of it, and what you're paying each month for your mortgage or for your rent, like, that's important. But, insurance matters a lot. I'm a landlord. I have a property in Gainesville that I rent out to some folks, and that for me has been the number one reason that I've had to increase the rent for my tenants, is because of homeowners insurance for the property. So that's a big one we need to be looking at. And then energy costs is another in terms of the total housing cost. Energy can actually be a really crippling burden for a lot of people, and that's where I've spent a lot of my time over the past several years. But I won't dwell on that because I know you and I nerded out on energy a little bit already. But, another big thing for me too, to kind of come back to the preemption piece is I think communities need to have a little bit more power to come up with local solutions around housing. The thing I always come back to, we live in a very diverse state. I mean, and you can see it even just in this district. You've got some of these small communities in Baker County that are facing, like suburban sprawl issues that are coming their way from Jacksonville. And then you've got bigger cities like Gainesville. And so, we've come up with some options in our community that we'd like to try around affordable housing, but we are actually stymied from being able to do that, and some of them at least by Tallahassee. And so that for me is a big one. I won't ever claim on any of these issues that I've got all the answers, but what I will say is that I think that the folks in communities have a lot of the answers and they just need to be allowed to pursue them. And if Tallahassee isn't going to help, if they aren't actually going to help fund affordable housing and help communities get affordable housing, the least they can do is get the hell out of the way and let communities come up with their own solutions and support those that are showing some success. So that's kind of the beginning of the conversation for me, but it is a very big topic, and I'm sure there's a lot of different ideas and ways that you and other folks think that we should be approaching this issue for sure.
Yeah, I know here home insurance, but also property taxes here in Clay County specifically. Property taxes, if you look from like 2012 up to today, for some people, property taxes have doubled. For some people, they've tripled. So, there's this big referendum on the ballot statewide to reduce property taxes. It was to eliminate, and then the state legislature doesn't have any guts, so they took a bunch of stuff out of it. Where do you stand on that measure to reduce the amount of property taxes that people are paying?
Yeah, I have some real concerns about this particular amendment as it's been put forward. I have some concerns about what it will mean fiscally for our communities. I think there's kind of like two sort of layers to this bomb. One we're going to see pretty immediately, and then another one as it rolls out over a number of years, we're going to see pretty big impacts as well fiscally. But the thing that really concerns me, particularly given the patterns that we've seen in Tallahassee, is, when people raise this question of like, well, how are we going to fund, the things we need to fund in our municipalities if we roll the taxes back like this? The answer seems to be, well, Tallahassee will provide the funding. But as we've seen over and over again, I don't think that's a road we want to go down because so a lot of it seems like a big power grab to me from Tallahassee. I think that if folks have issues with property taxes in their communities, there's a pretty good local remedy for that, you know, and that is to get involved in local government and get people out of office that are not willing to do what you want them to do on local tax issues. I'd also just like to see, again, kind of more flexibility for our communities to be able to raise incomes in different ways, so that we maybe don't have to rely so heavily on property taxes. I mean, I think that's part of the picture too. So anyway, so I have concerns. I hope we're going to have a really robust conversation about it. Obviously, everybody would like to pay less. Sure, I'd like to pay less. But I also have some concerns about what that would mean for the community that I live in and the amenities that I enjoy living in the city and the essential services that we rely on.
Yeah, I think this is where you and I probably disagree quite a bit on this, and that's okay. But I think, like in Clay County in particular, there is a lot of money being spent on things that are just unnecessary, and it's both the county government and the school district. School district taxes have been exempted from this bill that's before the voters, so the schools aren't going to be touched. So everyone crying that supposedly this is a threat to education is either willfully ignorant or just misinformed. But from a local level, I'll tell you, there's one specific example here in Clay County. We have this regional ballpark. So there's a road called Blanding Boulevard, State Road 21, that sort of goes down the middle of the county. connects the north end to the southern part in Keystone. And Camp Blanding is near this thing. This thing is literally out in the middle of the woods, nowhere. And we spent millions of dollars on it. And it's hosted a handful of like soccer events and other things. And it's a great facility, a bunch of soccer fields, a bunch of stuff out there. But it was money that we didn't need to spend at the time, and we didn't really have the funds. Part of it came from Tallahassee, and we had one county commissioner, and he knows who he is, and I'm not going to name him. He went to at the same time we were giving money to one of the municipalities in Green Cove Springs for pickleball courts, and he's just bragging about the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on pickleball courts. So there is excess. So part of me, I guess, like I'm less concerned about amenities and other things because I know that there is fat, at least here in Clay County. I know that we are spending money on things we don't need to spend money on. We've got a county manager, and then like at one point we had like half a dozen assistant county managers all making six figures. We had a county auditor who, via legislation from the state, her auditing responsibilities were shifted to the clerk of the court, and we were paying this lady, over $100,000 a year. And recently, she comes and demands like something like a $50,000 pay increase. So I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about things like the sheriff budget, right? And everyone here in Clay County loves Sheriff Cook, and that's all well and good, but her budget has increased double digits every single year she's been in office. And if you look at the other counties, both in your district that you're running for and across the state, that is one of the biggest drivers of increases in taxes the local municipalities and the counties are taking from people and it seems to be something that's been driven by the Florida Sheriff's Association. They're giving this playbook and talking points to the sheriffs. They're then coming and say, we need more money, more money, more money, more money. Now, I'm all for public safety. I'm not a defund the police guy by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think at some point, all of the local entities have to learn to live within their means. So I think that's kind of a good segue. Where do you stand on, public safety and law enforcement? Some people that run for the blue team are very much like, let's get rid of the police, let's defund them. What's your stance in general on funding for public safety and law enforcement, especially considering we might be heading towards a fiscal crunch if this amendment on the ballot passes?
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, so this is a good example of one of the ways that I might not be the best blue team player, to be honest. I feel like i- if someone breaks into my house, someone attacks my family, my house catches on fire, whatever, like I know who I'm going to call. I'm not going to call my local like anarchist collective for help. Like I'm calling the police for help. And so like I know that. And I think that the work that our, public safety folks do is incredibly valuable. I think it's incredibly important. I personally think that they should be amongst the best paid, best taken care of people in our society because they literally risk their lives to protect people. I have tremendous respect for them and the work that they do. That being said, I also think they have to be held accountable. And so, you know, in my world, our public safety folks would be people that are paid very well, that are taken very well care of, that are very respected, and that are held to a very high standard. And if they, do things that violate the public trust, then that has to be dealt with appropriately, and they have to be held to account. So that's where I'm at, to put it as succinctly as I can on that whole question.
Yeah, and that's where I am too. I have nothing but respect for people who do the work of law enforcement and fire rescue and all those different facets of public safety. I do think they should be well paid. I think teachers should also be well paid. People that are doing the hard and important work, I think should make a ton of money doing it. But I do think it's the same thing that I see in sort of the general economy, home prices, car prices, even electricity prices. At some point, there's only so much money people have in their pockets on a monthly basis, right? So for taxes to pay for public safety, to pay for cars, pay for homes, at some point the local municipalities are going to have to tighten their belt and realize that they just can't come back for double digit increases every year. So it sounds like okay, you and I are pretty, it sounds like we're pretty aligned on some of that stuff. So let's sort of segue into education. Another state level thing that's happening is the voucher program. this high level program that is giving money to people who want to homeschool their kids or take their kids to private school, and basically have their children not be in the public schools. It's been found to have bled millions of dollars, if not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, in just sort of payments that went places they shouldn't go, pay money they can't account for. Where do you stand on public education in general, and what do you think of the voucher?
Yeah. So like you, I have a wife that works in schools, and um, I'm a project of public education, and I think that to me, one of the highest standards that you can judge a society by is the quality of its education system. That is the sort of pinnacle of civilization, as far as I'm concerned, is how well of an educated populace do you have, and how much are you investing in educating the next generation? So I think it's incredibly valuable. I think that our educators in this state are just horribly disrespected, not just in terms of how badly they're paid, but just the legislation that we see coming out of Tallahassee. I think it's incredibly disrespectful, and I think that that's why we see this state just bleeding educators. I mean, I see it every day at my wife's school. People that are just like, I'm done. I'm going to go work retail for like more money and less headache. And it's sad. It's sad. So anyway, education is incredibly important to me. We have some charter schools in our community that I think are doing a really good job. Like and I'm a big like diversity person. I don't like the idea of like monopoly, basically, any kind of monopoly, whether it's in the utility sector or whether it's the education sector. I like a diversity of opportunities for people. And so if the public school that you're zoned for is just really not working for you and your family, I like the idea of people having a choice that they can figure something else out that works better for them. I have people in my family that are doing that with their kids right now. At the same time, that diversity of opportunity should not come at the expense of our public schools being adequately funded. And so they haven't been adequately funded to begin with before we went down this voucher road. And then to now start a whole new program that siphons even more money out of our public education system is just problematic to me. And I think that that's just been, unfortunately, it's been an ethic in Florida for way too long that we don't value public education. And I've heard, having grown up here, I've heard multiple theories over the years of, all the people that move down here and don't have kids in the system, and so they don't want to invest in it, and so on and so forth. But as my wife always says, those kids that we're educating today are going to be the ones that are, taking care of y'all in a generation. So you better invest in them. You better make sure that they're well taken care of, because otherwise you're going to pay for it down the road. So yeah, I strong believer in public education, and I think we need to be doing more with public education, not dismantling it, which is what we seem to be.
All right. So yeah, all right. I think that's everything I can think of that people of Clay County might care about. Obviously, I don't speak for everybody here. Is there anything else you want people to know about you? What should people know about you and why you're running and just you in general?
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me, and thanks for having the conversation today. I really appreciate it. And I wish that, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and I feel like we've had a pretty good civil conversation today. We despite some things that we disagree on, things we agree on. And I just want to see more of that in our country. It feels like a lot of times that we're these sort of like warring tribes that hate each other. And that is really sad to me. Like I said, I'm not a deeply partisan person. I'm running as a Democrat in this race literally because the law requires it. I was registered as a Democrat a year ago. That's what they require. So, but I just want people to know that, like, just because I've got this scarlet letter D around my neck here, I'm still somebody that you can talk to, that we can have civil conversation and learn about each other, and hopefully that you can trust. And so I want people to have some conversations with me, give me a chance. I want to hear what people's issues are, just like you've raised issues that are on your mind today. And yeah, just encourage people to check me out. Again, the website is takingbackflorida.org. Got my contact information on there. I've got some things that I'm issues that I'm interested in and where I'm coming from, and I ask people to engage.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate your time. Wish you the best of luck. I think competition is good in these races. I think conversations are good. Conversations give you the ability to test your own ideas against other people's ideas, and sometimes you learn things you didn't know, and sometimes you just meet somebody that you become friends, and you may never have met them otherwise. So appreciate your time, man. Appreciate the effort that goes into running in general, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks again. I appreciate it.